I had no idea how much working with you guys affected me until afterwards, when I realized what a delight it was to work with people who were 10 or 15 years younger than I. And this is what led me ultimately to start teaching, mostly MBAs, but also undergraduate and at Fordham in France, in Moscow, in Singapore, and Mexico City. I mean, it's been a delight, and I would never have done that but for the Peace Corps.
One of the things that direct result is travel. I met Barbara. We went overseas to India to travel, and England. We lived in England and India, and it was, you know, it was easy after negotiating Afghanistan. You know, you could do this. I mean, you probably do this. And to this day, we travel a lot, and we go places, and you know, we'll tell friends that we're going to Russia or something. Oh my God, aren't you afraid? You know, they're setting off bombs in Moscow or something. You know, and we go and come back in one piece. And so we've learned how to do that very nice. And that's the direct thing.
Before I went to Afghanistan, I had never been outside of Boston, and I just didn't know anything, and I didn't appreciate it until I reflected on it. That, like you, John, since I've been back, I've gone to places where I knew nobody, and this was to live. So, for example, I had a public health service scholarship in medical school, and to pay my debt to society, they sent me to the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, and to work in migrant clinics. And, okay. And so I just did it. And I never saw myself as being adventuresome. And yet, when we retired and moved to Nova Scotia, again, I knew nobody there. And then, but we needed a place we wanted a place in Maine to have as a U.S. address. And it was like throwing a dart at a map. And I didn't need to worry about what might happen when I got there. And so I would say that it really changed my whole ability to be braver.
I think I was 42 or 45 when I went to the Philippines for a one-year program, and that was really, really hard, having to do all of the people all of the trainers, all of the Filipinas thought that we all knew nothing, no matter how old we were, and they treated us like we knew nothing, and that was really, really hard being a trainee. Always having to be told what to do, even if you didn't have to be told what to do. I mean, after Afghanistan, I didn't have to be told what to do. But that was, being in that training program was very, very difficult. Not because of anything strenuous, but because of the mental, being treated like an idiot all the time, a lot. But I didn't feel that way in Austin as much.
I think there was at least one older couple who started with us, but they only lasted about a week and left. And I felt bad because once we got to country, we kept like regular working hours, you know, normal hours. But the mental aspect, as Barbara said, I was thinking from the standpoint of learning a new language and learning a new culture, and you're older, how hard it would be. But she's bringing out the point that you do come, as you get older, you bring more experience, and those experiences were kind of ignored, or the fact that you're more experienced.
It's not about the training, but one of the things, if you remember that because Bernice was older, they had her stay and live in Kabul, and because she was older and had white hair, the Afghans treated her with great respect. And so she had a much easier time being a really good teacher because the kids were so respectful to her. And then on top of that, she hung out with all the other people her age that were in Afghanistan who were UN people or embassy people, and so she had a wonderfully varied social life. And then out of that, she got a job and went to teach in Taiwan afterwards. So I don't think she ever came back to the States till she was over 70.
Jalalabad experience, Bob Rogers, Dr. Rogers, was down there, and I don't know how he experienced training, but once he got there, he had about 10 students bowing down before him and trailing him around, and the young doctors would just stand there, and they treated the young doctors as if they knew nothing. And you know, this guy they worshipped, white hair, walking around. He was a great doctor. Yeah, but they loved him.
living in the South and teaching in newly integrated schools. When I came back from graduate school the first time, they sent me to a school that was traditionally African American. I had no clue at that time that this was the prestige African American high school in the city. And what did I know? And I think I was more acceptable to the faculty that remained in place. I mean, they didn't shift everybody, they sort of shifted half. And I had one of the long-term teachers there. He had gone there to school. He was a basketball coach, a really fine guy. And he said to me one day in the teacher's lounge, he said, "I'll bet the Peace Corps helped you prepare for this experience." It did.
I have a friend that I've done a lot of traveling and climbing with for the last 30, 40 years almost, and he kind of drives me crazy. He often plans some of the trips, and he plans them way ahead of time, and he gets everything all set up, and he'll call like two months before we're leaving or something, and he says, okay, we're going to this little town in Venezuela, El Chaltén or whatever, and he says, I've booked us at the best hotel in town, you know. And it drives me crazy. I mean, we go there and it's some stupid place that I dislike, and it costs too much and so forth. And I would much prefer, and I think even on that one trip, I remember that particular hotel didn't. It was okay for a couple nights, but it ended up not working out. And we ended up doing what I much prefer to do and learn from the Peace Corps. You know, you just land in a city and you just start walking around till you find a place to stay.
On reflection, when I came out of the Peace Corps, I thought, what impact did I have in Afghanistan? And we talked about this the other day. And I have to say that I really felt that the impact was more on me, profoundly on me, rather than the impact that I had in Afghanistan. And that's, of course, a whole nother story. And just the other thing, we studied Dari. And the thing that impressed me about that was how profound an influence I think that had on the quality of our experience there. And because I remember when we first arrived, we were staying in the press club in Kabul, and the electricity went out. And so we had our bicycles, and we had to go out and get candles to have lights in the room. And nobody knew the word for candle. So we were having to do charades in the bazaar to try to figure out what the word was for candle. And somehow we made it work.
Well, in my case, in addition to being the Peace Corps in Afghanistan, as you know, I married Afghanistan. And one of the things that came out of that was that Afghans really don't like to plan ahead, as you may know. And so I'm 50 years later, I mean, I would never plan anything ahead, because if you do, you have to change it anyway. And I had a brother who would call me up in October and say, I'm planning my spring road trip. Are you going to be in Washington on the 3rd and 4th of April? And I would say, Americans are just nuts. I mean, how can you live your life 6 months out? I mean, it's the most bizarre thing. I mean, I can't do it anymore, so I've become Afghan in that way.
Yeah, about the whole nature of time. When I was in the small village of Khanabad, and I was there for 9 months, there was a certain sameness to every day. You'd get up and, you know, you'd have your tea and you'd go to your class and people would be going, Mister, what is this, what is this? And you'd come home and then I'd play basketball with the guys and then you'd have rice and go to bed. And I got into a zone. It was the closest to any kind of Zen meditation when there was no yesterday and there was no tomorrow. There was only now. And it was the most incredible feeling because as Westerners, you're saying, we're always planning ahead. And I was wondering what was going to happen this day and that day. But here was a situation where time just was flowing. There was just this sameness, which was really very reassuring. And I enjoyed it. It was an interesting experience. I've never had it again.
When we were on our way back, we traveled through the east and we ran into a couple that had been in Ethiopia. And we talked to them about their experience, and they had had big parties and they had danced and they had sung. And in Mazar-e Sharif, we did not do those things. And then we came home and we met a couple from who had been in Brazil. They had been in Sao Paulo. And they had laughed and danced and sang gone to good restaurants and been invited to people's homes, and we didn't do that in Mazar-i-Sharif.
When we had to spend 24 hours in Djibouti, and I was traveling with a guy I met in the line waiting to get on the plane, and he had been in the Peace Corps in, I think it might have been Malawi, and he was in a village, and every night he was required to spend the evening with the chief and the other minor chieftains, drinking some kind of homemade alcohol, smoking some kind of weed of something, and then he was expected to sleep with the chief's daughter. After all that, and then in the morning, the women would all be down washing the clothes in the river, and she would be regaling them with his sexual abilities. And when he was telling me this, I was like, my God, the guys in Afghanistan never had any experience like this.
My thought came to these differences in the countries, and it was a stereotype, and I forgot where I heard this, that the volunteers from Latin America came back to the States as revolutionaries because they were ready to change things. They had access to understanding all the politics, but the volunteers from the East, and especially from Afghanistan, came back calm and serene. And I thought it was because of all the chars.
On Peace Corps Day, I think it's March 3rd or something like that, they asked us to give talks in schools. And I was assigned to a high school, and there was a volunteer with me who had been in one of the South American countries, I can't remember. And she confronted me when she found out I was in Afghanistan, and she said, "Didn't you have a cook or a maid or something?" And I said, "Well, yeah, we had the kind of all-purpose house person who cooked and cleaned and did the food shopping mainly." And I said, and she said, "What about your laundry? Did you do your laundry?" I said, "No, I sent it to the Dobie, and I sent it into the village, into the town." She said, "Well, in South America, we did all that for ourselves. We were the real Peace Corps." And I was so taken aback by that I was kind of silent, imagine, for a moment. And then I said, "You know, I had a real job." And I had to be there at 7 in the morning and come home at 3 or 4 in the afternoon. All the meat would have been gone, and you had to start cooking it at noon. And you know, if I'd spent time cooking, shopping, cooking, cleaning, and washing my clothes, I could not have done the job that I was sent there to do. But she said, "We were the real Peace Corps." The thing I envy about people who served in some other countries was not the drinking and the dancing and the having sex with the chief's son, but the fact that people can go back to those countries and maybe even see their village or their friends or the family they stayed with. I'm thinking of Kenya, for example, which has had Peace Corps continuously. And so you can go and return to your work site, you can see your friends, you can have a nice vacation. And for us, that's impossible.
When we were in Afghanistan, we did visit people in their homes with great frequency. In fact, in Mazar, we used to go and play bridge every night with Comrade John and the like. So the people were very kind to us and very inviting. But I do think that, especially for women in Afghanistan, there was an added consciousness that you had to always have in mind. And you know, one of the first things we learned was how to turn the front wheel of your bicycle back out quickly so that they didn't knock you into the Dewey when they snuck up beside you and then pulled in to try to knock you over.
Well, we learned how to knock them over.
That's right. That's what we learned. We learned how to turn the front wheel into theirs and knock them over instead and keep on going. But I was spit on. I'm sure other people were as well. And we did take care to be modest as we were instructed. But there was a different consciousness that one had to do. And you know, I was a rabble-rouser in medical school. I was on the Joint Commission on the Status of Women, and I was a real feminist and stuff like that. But among the things that I learned in the Peace Corps was how to be respectful while you were rousing rabble. And it stood me in good stead. In my workplace, I worked in a lab at Kabul University with all men. I never had any difficulties in work or in family situations. I'm talking about the louts on the street with their bicycles. Trying to knock us over. If it were anybody who knew us, they would never do such a thing, and in fact, they would defend us.
After the first Jeshen, the Independence Day celebration, there were quite a number of problems, particularly because Afghan hands went where they shouldn't with the female volunteers. So I sent out a notice, which you may laugh at, saying that you had to wear a trench coat buttoned up completely at the wrists, in the waist, all the buttons in front and in back, and so forth, just to keep from getting harassed by these louts from the provinces who had never seen a neck or a face of a woman unless they were their relatives. And I think my recollection is that, Jeshen happens, I think, in August, if I'm not mistaken, and it's hotter than hell. And telling a woman to wear a trench coat in that heat was not popular.
I sort of remember when I think back on having been a nurse and going in Mazar-e Sharif and how we were treated. I think one of the things we learned to respect their culture too. And, our eye-to-eye contact became sort of, we would speak but we would have our head turned just a bit. So we weren't doing a direct eye-to-eye contact with a lot of the doctors that we worked with. They learned to respect that.
In Atlanta, there was a very large and active group of returned Peace Corps volunteers, and I met a lot of very interesting people at their various functions. And the women who were in Turkey and Iran in the same years that we were in Afghanistan had miserable experiences. They were touched and groped, just in the bazaar shopping, and they all said they were, more or less appropriately dressed, maybe not buttoned up in trench coats, but this one woman was out in Gaziantep, which is toward the east of Turkey, and she could not go out by herself. I mean, it would have to be two women, or a woman with one of the American guys, or maybe the servant, or some escort. And this was our years, 64 to 68, the various people that I met. The same was true in Iran. They said, if you were walking along the street, the Iranian men would come along on motor scooters and pat you on the butt as they drove by on their motor scooter. And I certainly never had any experience like that from any Afghan men. And I was in Afghanistan in 1995 and treated with huge respect. I couldn't believe how great an experience I had in 1995, going back to Jalalabad, and went walking in the town from the hospital with a Red Cross hired interpreter and a nurse, Kalamyar, who'd been in Jalalabad when I was working there. And every time we stopped to meet one of Kalamyar's friends, because he was from Jalalabad, the interpreter was from Shinwari or someplace, Kalamyar would say, "She was here and she came back." And people were just thrilled. I mean, they were just thrilled. But in that visit, I didn't go walking by myself because they were afraid I was going to get kidnapped.
In a lot of ways, I felt right at home in Afghanistan because I was brought up kind of the same way. Though the women were out there, I was never allowed to touch a woman, even in America, To be in Jabal Sarraj, where I was for, 15, 16 months, I don't know, I can't remember anymore. I never met a woman, was never introduced to a woman, and never saw one up close whatsoever. And if I did in the bazaar, they were in the Chaudhry, of course. And I was invited into most, I can't say most, but many, many homes in that area, being the teacher. You juxtapose that to Kabul, where I went for my third year, and it's like going from day to night or night to day. There I was a part of Afghan families. I stayed in their homes. I knew the mothers, the grandmothers, the daughters, the babies, the uncles, the aunts, and I had a place there to sleep with the children and was like a part of the family. So I had like two surrogate families in Kabul. So to contrast that to Jabal Sarraj and Kabul, the rural and the city, it was amazing, and I'm glad I got to see both sides. The feeling of acceptance wherever I went, it was awesome. It was a wonderful experience, and I just want to take again to say how blessed I feel of having been with you guys. I mean, here we are, and thank the Afghans and the powers that be, whoever and wherever they are, that allowed this to happen, this opportunity.
I probably would have been in Vietnam if I hadn't gone to the Peace Corps. Or maybe back, riding a motorcycle down the street with an American flag on the back. I don't know, but my early life was kind of devoted. I didn't join the Peace Corps to stay out of the Army or anything else. I joined the Peace Corps because I wanted to be in the Peace Corps. But once you're there and you come out, you're faced with going in the Army. So I got a graduate deferment and went to Duke. I met Barbara, and we met in Hindi class. And then they announced that no more graduate school deferments would be held. So I had to find something else. Because I was in the Peace Corps, I was able to take advantage of a program in which you could teach in the New York City schools without the credentials if you took a little short training program. So I did that, and I went to New York City and taught in what was undoubtedly the worst year ever for the New York schools. It was the Oceanville, Brownsville time, the teachers' strike. I had to be a scab because if I didn't work, I was in the Army. So, and the school was in disarray, and I learned that the Afghan students were respectful and wonderful compared to the New York City's students. And so I was able to do that, and then went to graduate school again and returned, and we went into South Asian studies, and I married Barbara. So it was quite different than it would have been otherwise.
I don't think there's a day goes by that I don't think something about Afghanistan. And we were just talking with Jack about that. Sometimes they're just fleeting thoughts, and sometimes they're deeper. And one of the ones that keeps coming back to me is a great experience in the girls' school in Mazar-i-Sharif, Sultana Razia. And it was a wintry day, and I lived across town, and I learned you couldn't ride your bike in a muddy street because we all have done it once, and you don't do it again because it all clogs up. And I probably, Bill and I lived together, but we hadn't lit the Bokhari in the Tashnav for a while, so I probably hadn't had a bath for a while either. I'll be very honest, You kind of washed pieces that you exposed. It was a nasty day. And I went into school, and all these wonderful young girls, whom I only took me a while to appreciate them being in school with me, a foreign male. And I was teaching them physics, for God's sake. And can you believe? Yeah. And I was a physics minor, but I had no language skills to handle that. And in comes a group of clean, shiny-faced Americans who flew up from Kabul. I think they were guests of the ambassador, maybe, and they were taking a tour around the country. And they were cheerful and very nice people. I'm not, but I remember thinking, I don't want these people, I don't want them in this classroom with me. And they're here to kind of look us all over and leave and say, oh, isn't that nice? Isn't that wonderful? And it gave me a perspective of perhaps how we as Americans are viewed when we go to countries that we consider poor. We want to go and be nice and friendly, and we are. We're very good, I think, with that sometimes. But also sometimes our arrogance comes through. And that's what I detected from these folks, that I felt like I was on inspection, and all my girls were too, by the way. It wasn't just me. that they would go leave and they would had their Afghan experience, and these girls and me, we had to get through the rest of this day. And it was very good for me, because that perspective that I gained from the visit of these very nice people who came smiley-faced, all warm and toasty and nice clothes, and I was not, and these young girls, they were very embarrassed. They pulled their scarves across their faces, and and it was just, we were on inspection, and I didn't like it very much, and it was very good that I have that perspective sometimes of how we can be viewed, and we don't mean it that way. These folks did not mean it that way.
Of the things that Afghanistan gave me was, in spite of how miserable you are, you have to be open, because you might have a real magical experience. And my experience was in the summer of 1966. We could take our vacation because of the school schedule in Kandahar, and it was August. It was brutally hot in Kandahar, and the trip started. Everything went bad. The initial bus broke down, and then we got on another bus. And it was one of those wonderful Afghan buses that, with this, the decoration and the goats and chickens and people crammed into it, miserably hot. Anyway, so we're driving along. It really was a miserable start to what was going to be a long trip. And finally the bus stopped at a caravanserai, and so that everybody could take care of business and have some refreshment. Anyway, it was, I can't remember a time when I felt so miserable, and with the prospect of having to go, we were planning to go through Afghanistan, across Iran, into Turkey, and down into Greece. So anyway, here's this caravanserai out in this burnt landscape outside of Kandahar, and there was a door into the compound. It was Spanish style or probably Afghan style with the circular, and we ducked down to go inside of this caravanserai, and on the interior it was full of rose bushes. So that after this miserable experience in the bus, we walked in, and the smell of the roses just was like whump. And the charpoy had sprinkled water all over the stones inside the caravanserai, so there was this cool breeze that came up. And they had those fired pottery vases that you could put water in, and it would cool the water. Yeah, and I have to tell you, that experience is one of the most powerful ones I had, and it taught me, the thing I learned from that was that you have to be open even in the worst circumstances, because sometimes there are really magic moments, and I had a lot of magic moments in Afghanistan.